You know what I mean, fam? The Toronto man's word of the day. I don't really know if I hear this around Toronto still, but I know youths in the UK are dropping it. The word is dusty. One is a dusty youth still, meaning you're unkept. You're not that clean. And that applies to one for sure. What's up, fam? It's your boy Demuir here, purveyor of all sounds underground. Thank you for joining me on my YouTube channel today, where I'll be discussing the topic of how I handle filtered basses, or rather the top 2 plugins I use to handle filtered basses and why I use them. But before we jump into things, what I need from you is that SLC. Hit subscribe, like, comment, and more importantly, hit the notifications bell to stay in touch with the new videos that we have up and coming. Alright, so let's jump into it. This is going to be more of an overview as you look at my screen here. I'm going to give you a listen to this track. It's a remix I did for Frosted Records, which is one of the first labels I signed to in my come up back in the day. Stellar label out of Montreal. Shouts out to Max and crew and the family at Salon Diamé. So let's give this a listen, and then I'll hone in on what I'm talking about. Now I'm going to add the secret sauce. I'll change all this, not so secret, but this is the plugin I actually used on this track. SPL. Get this baby out of the way. Alright, so you know what, before we jump into the SPL, I'm going to share with you what I did to typically handle filtered basses. And when I talk about filtered basses, I think a lot of people who are sample heavy in their production know what I'm talking about. So this is the loop. So the filtered bass is right here. So it's the bass frequencies that are within the main sample, and you just EQ them differently to bring out that sound. So what I'm talking about here is the filtered bass. Typically what I would do is, after I EQ it, and we can have a look at how I EQ this bass here. It's on 3. Yeah, I pretty much just bumped it in this area anywhere between, make sure that stays on, anywhere between 109 hertz to around or just below, I'm going to say 500, 450-ish. But I'm really honing in on this area here to get the most out of the bass signal. And you know, even though you EQ it and all of that and it sounds relatively decent, you still find yourself saying, hey, I need to give it a little bit of extra oomph. So although you know, I EQ'd it in the best possible way for this situation, I would typically back in the day use this, which is the UAD Empirical Labs Fatso Senior. I had, I think it was Vince Ailey tell me about this. He was like, yeah, I can throw this on your tracks because it acts as a compressor and a limiter all in one, with a bit of distortion and craziness, and it all has this nice bit of warmth. So I typically use this preset and then tweak it from there. So let's listen to what it sounds like. Let's A and B it. And make sure you're wearing headphones for this piece, because you'll hear all of the unique harmonics as a result of applying these plugins on the filtered bass samples. So we have that rolling along. Let's apply the Empirical Labs. So let's shut it off. Turn it on. Listen to it with the sample. So with the Empirical Labs Fatso Senior, it definitely adds a bit of distortion to create some additional harmonics, and it feels like it really just gives it oomph and pushes the bass a bit more out in front. And I would typically use this for these situations back in the day, and it's fine. I think it's still a good option to have depending on the track, but it's a nice way to get started if you're on UAD products and you want to leverage this as a part of the technique, and you can, you know, tweak the input signal and the output signal accordingly. But one of the things I find about using this plugin for that particular situation, it sounds a little bit more harsh to me. Maybe it's because of the distortion stuff that is happening within the plugin, and the compression pieces just boost that sort of activity as well. So when I got put on to the SPL Vitalizer here, I think I found that sweet spot. You know, I wanted a nice warm sound still that was put more meat into the bass signal and kind of pushed it up front, but not with that harsh effect that we got, in my opinion, from the Empirical Labs Fatso Senior. So let's give this a listen without. I'm going to shut off the main loop. So here's our filtered bass. Now let's engage it with the Vitalizer. So without the Vitalizer, with the Vitalizer. Now I'm going to engage it with the main loop as well. So to me, this sounds a bit more cohesive, like they're meant to be together, and it sounds a bit more like well-rounded. And you know, I'm applying these plugins on the same EQ curve that I showed you here, where I'm just totally getting the most out of the bass signals in that same sample in the main loop here. You just can't hear it in the main loop because, you know, I've EQ'd it out. I've EQ'd it much differently. Yeah, right here I shaped out up to 315 hertz on that one. But I really love using the Vitalizer for these situations because it sounds more musical to me. It has a bit more depth, but it doesn't sound forced. So I've been using this a lot lately for these types of situations to get the most out of my bass. And more importantly too, just because it's a great plugin and it warms up the filtered bass sound, you should absolutely sidechain that bass frequency. I got track spacer on this, sidechain to the kick. I'm using an audio kick this time instead of the go send signal here I showed you in my previous video about sidechaining. But the point nonetheless is I think this just sounds much warmer. And you could also control other functions of this plugin like the drive. So you know what, let's give it a listen and I'll mess with each of these options. So sometimes if I'm not getting as much loudness out of it, before I go to the output, I'll move the drive up a bit. Let's do that here. You can hear some of the difference there. I also love this piece, which is, you know, the soft or tightening of the sound. So let me just go to the extreme here. I go super tight and back to soft. Super tight and then back to soft here. Compression, I don't really mess with this too much because at this point because I already got it going through the console one, I put EQ on it. I don't want to squash the bass sound at all. And I'm already confident with the sidechain function I have on it from Trackspacer. So I'm not looking to leverage the compression here too much. Sometimes I would go right over to the stereo expander in some cases, depending on what other instruments I have. And I'll also mess with the intensity a bit. But more often than not, I'm messing with the drive and the bass between the soft and tight options. I really love this plugin for filtered bass situations because, as I said earlier, I find it much more musical, and it just sounds like it's meant to be there when it's joined nicely with the main sample again, and the overall beat. And I find it just sits nicer, you know? If you listen to everything, it just feels like it sits nicer, as opposed to if we go to the Empirical Labs. It sounds good, but it's still like it sounds a bit more harsh to me, you know. So I've been leaning heavily on the SPL Vitalizer. Shouts out to Arturo Garces for the tip on this one. I highly recommend this plugin for this function. I mean, you can use it for other things, and I haven't experimented enough with it to know, but you can use it on vocals, just looking at some of the presets here. You can use it on drum loops, even pianos and guitars and stuff. I use this thing mainly for the bass. I'll actually use the low end rock bass as a start for my preset, and then just tweak from there. But it's a great plugin. I highly recommend it for these situations when it comes to handling filtered bass. And there you have it. Those are my thoughts on how I handle filter bass samples in these types of situations. Let me know what you do or what plugins you use, or if you got any other questions or comments behind it. I usually join a conversation within 48 hours of posting these videos. I'd love to hear what you think about it. Much love and respect to you. Peace.